Hi guys, welcome back to Welcome Home Custom. Today we are going to learn how I shaped my showstopper lion. Let's get started. There are a number of different tools I use for shaping, and so I thought we would go through these tools really quickly. So we have this tool, which is a little bit like a barrel, and it's just basically a straight cylinder. And I use this to take off excess material to create more of a sloping look. So let me see if I can move the camera a little bit so we can talk about it. So if you look right here, I have sloped this piece down so that these appear to be in front of this hair, okay? And so I take my tool and I really just eliminate a ton of material. So when you look at it from the side, it's kind of blurry, but I've almost taken it down to 1/8 inch on this side, whereas I'm still 1/4 inch on this side. So when it butts up with another 1/4 inch, it appears to be further away. Okay, so that's one thing we want to try to do when we shape, is create that optical illusion of something being further away. So that's what I use the cylinder for. I then also have these rounded barrels. They're concave, and that creates a nice rounded effect on the sides of my material. So this almost acts a lot like a router would if we were using a router. Okay, so we just pull it along the side. And then we also have these really fine needle point, which this one is bent. I dropped it. And that we can use, let me move the camera, or let me move the lion over so we can see his face. So in the file, this portion right here was actually scored, but what I did was I started with this and I just started to work it down as much as I could to create this nice separation and almost make it look like it's a true indent of the lion's face. I then rounded the edges a little bit more with this type of attachment. So this is a sanding disc, and it is held on by a mandrel. And so there's a screw right here that we use to hold the sandpaper onto the mandrel, okay? And so for this, we would just glide it along the side. And this takes a little bit of practice to use. It's very easy to get carried away and get too much of a indent in certain areas. So this is one you really have to practice with. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is demonstrate all of these tools in action so you can see kind of what I am talking about when I use it. So let me move this guy out of the way, and we will go ahead and grab one of our pieces. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and grab this piece right here. Okay, something that you could do is mark it with a pencil where you want it to be more recessed. So in this instance, because of the way it's shaped like this, that means these pieces of his hair are actually supposed to be in front. Okay, so we need to trim off a bunch of this down here or up here, and then where it meets right here, this piece is in front. And so we need to trim off this right here. And so really the way to identify where to shape and where to not shape, think of the piece as a whole, and if it appears like it is cut off, so how this walnut is cut off right here, that means all of this needs to be sanded down a little bit lower. And then right here would need to be, oop, you can't see that. So this walnut as an example, this all here would need to be sanded down. And then right here, we want to sand way down. Because if you look here, how I've sanded these down, they're a little bit lower and they appear to be coming out of his face or out of his mane rather than really disjointed with this flat edge. Okay, so we're trying to create fluid movement by sanding off this additional material. Okay, so like this as an example, this one right here, we need to make this V a little bit lower. And then here, this needs to all be sanded down lower. Right here, trying not to get in the way. All of this will be sanded down lower. And actually all of this as well is sanded down lower. Okay, so you can go through and mark all of your pieces like that just to give you kind of an idea of what you need to sand and what you don't. And again, I like to place all my pieces first, and then I can go through and mark and kind of get an idea of what I need to do as far as rounding all of the pieces. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a few pieces as an example. And I will do a voiceover for this portion because it's going to get super loud. Okay, so for this part, I like to start with the barrel shape first. This will take off the most material, and you're going to want to apply pressure, and you're pulling the rotary tool towards you. There should be a little bit of some resistance when you pull along. And what we're doing is we're trying to take off a lot of that material that we discussed earlier, so that it appears that in that area where those pieces meet, that it is actually behind or lower than the pieces next to it. So you can see it takes off quite a bit of material. Now I am using a lighter sanding bit for this. These do go up to extra coarse. In this, I'm just using their whisper bit, which is their finest. And I find it just makes it a little bit easier because it doesn't leave big grooves in my wood. I could probably take off more with a different tool if I really wanted to, but I don't really find it necessary. Also notice that I am wearing a glove. I highly recommend wearing a glove with the hand that you're holding the piece of wood with. Sometimes the rotary can slip and you can really mess up your hand that is holding the wood. Now I am using a Marathon, which is the actual tool that I'm putting the bits in. This Marathon can be used for right-handed or left-handed users. I'm not sure if Dremel has the same option, and that is basically where you can change the rotation so that it rotates the correct way when you are pulling the rotary towards you. Now I'll finish up the piece, going over everything just one more time, checking it out to make sure I'm happy with how much material I took off. You can really see that indent there with that one piece, but then once I put it with the rest of the pieces, it's going to look great. For this tool, I always turn it off, and then my barrel just twists, and that is what unlocks the bit. And now I'm going to put in the concave bit, and I'm going to round my edges. Rounding my edges is pretty much the same way, but now I'm going to hold it at kind of a 45-degree angle, and I am focusing on pulling and rounding off that edge. We're just wanting to take off a bunch of material and kind of give it a 45-degree angle, because then once we've done that, we can go through with our other bits and soften it up a little bit more and then do a hand sanding at the end. Make sure you keep the tool moving. You don't want to sit at one spot for too long because you can create a bit of an indent that you're going to have to fix later. It's okay, things are very fixable, but you just may have to sand a little bit more. Now I am switching over to the Whisper concave bit. Again, this is a finer grit, and this is going to get rid of some of that kind of chunky excess that we created with the other more coarse bit. You can see that it is taking down some of the fuzziness that we created, and just like a sandpaper, taking it to a softer sand. Now I'm going to switch over to the sanding disc so you can see that as well. And this is a little bit trickier to hold. So I hold it like this, and I am just gliding along the wood. I am not applying very much pressure at all, and I'm using it just to kind of soften that edge a little bit and go over it just fairly quickly, giving it a once over and cleaning up that edge. I found that I can make really big messes with this sanding disc, so again, it takes some practice. Now I'm going to finish with my sander, and I go over the whole thing, sanding everything down, just going over the piece, getting rid of any really hard angles that I maybe had created. I am using a 180 to 220 sandpaper, I believe. And again, this is just softening up and finishing the piece. And that is our sanded and rounded piece. Then I'll go ahead and put it back into its home just to check to see how it looks and move on to the next piece. You can see how it is sitting behind those pieces, and I'm just going to simply round the edges where it meets that piece versus sanding them down lower. Switching over to the sanding disc again, you can also use it to get into hard to reach places. So in this case, I am using it to get into this crevice area, and I'm holding it at an angle, and again, I am dragging it along and removing the material. I can also use a taper for this type of area. So I can go in this way and I can run the taper along that area or that corner and kind of pull it and really accent that area. And then I can also drag it along just to smooth out my edges. Now this is a perfect example of I didn't mark my wood, and I should have, because now I'm having to do extra work. But what I need to do is I need to level this area down, because there is hair that's going to be going into that triangle, that negative space, and the piece that I'm working on needs to be lower than that hair going into that negative space. So I am working this all down quite a bit. Again, I'm just holding it and pulling and dragging and applying pressure and taking off quite a bit of material. If you aren't sure if you've taken enough material off, you can always grab that piece and double check it. So in this case, I definitely need to take off more, and so I would go ahead and take more off. It's really just a bunch of sand it down, check it, sand it some more, round your edges, and honestly kind of enjoy the process. And one more real quick example of the taper. This piece right here has a ton of cutouts. So I go through and I basically rub the taper along those corners first, those recessed areas first, and then I sand out from there. And so the taper is good to get into those areas and work around those edges and take off that material. And then when you go to sand, you're going to want to use a good grit so that you can really work on cleaning up and refining those edges. You can also use that sanding disc once again to help clean up that piece as well. All right, guys, that's it. Hopefully you found the tutorial helpful. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and check out my other tutorials just like this one.